Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for spending your time here. I would just like to start by saying that every one of you opted to come here and chose to spend your time here. So clearly, this is a very important message that we have here today. Sustainability is very important to you. Sorry. We believe that sustainability is a necessity and that's important for the survival of our planet. And the businesses out there, your customers are also requiring you to think about sustainability and wanting you to play more and do more. However, we do have also businesses out there that come across as greenwashing. So as the businesses and us wanting to respond to that, we want to hear about how can businesses navigate what to do, and how can you come across as authentic and not fake? How can you do meaningful movements? How can you make meaningful movements? And how can you plan for the future? And also we want to know how can we start small, because it's a very, very big thing to take on. So in the next 60 minutes, we'll be discussing what strategies that businesses can adopt to cope with the future business landscape in the era of sustainability. We hope to hear from our distinguished panel here on what are the patterns that they've seen, what are the challenges that they've observed, what are the lessons that they've learned. So hopefully will be entertaining for you in the next 60 minutes. So we're going to start with getting our rapporteurs to respond to what we've heard from our keynote speakers. And I was hoping to start with, to kick things off with Dawn. And Dawn, I know you told me over dinner that I should throw away my notes. Clearly, I'm trying very hard to. And you also did make me feel a lot better because you told me that any question I ask you, you would just respond to whatever it is that you want to say. So it does make me feel a lot better. If I could kick things off with you, what is it that you want to say after hearing both Adrian's sharing and Jaspreet's sharing?
Thank you. Yeah. She had all these questions prepared in advance, and I said, no, it's supposed to be discussion. You can't prepare the questions for a discussion in advance. I was very impressed with the two keynotes. In fact, my first thought, I've already asked to Adrian, is, can I visit one of your stores and see how it works? And it turns out I have a gap in my schedule Saturday afternoon, so we're going to try to do that. And Procter & Gamble, of course, I've known about for a long time, but I never heard that story, and that's a wonderful story. And it's wonderful not because it's a nice story, but because it shows that Procter & Gamble has been doing the sort of things we are starting to talk about today. You've been doing it for a very long time. You know, in my circles, Procter & Gamble is also known as the best marketing company. And in fact, it was so good that it was actually an educational company, not on purpose. But people would get jobs at Procter & Gamble simply so they could say that they were trained at Procter & Gamble, and then they go someplace else to do their work. And but what was nice is you didn't talk about the marketing side. You talked about the sustainability side and the emphasis upon. You were using the word humanity-centered all the time, both of you, which I assume is fairly new, because I was when I tried to use the word, I didn't know what words I should call this new approach, and I searched all over, and I only found in the scientific literature 2 papers that were done a long time ago that used the word humanity-centered. And actually, to my great surprise, one of the authors, who was an author of both papers, was somebody who used to work for me. But you used it. Does that mean, tell me now actually, does that mean that you got it from here, or did you always use it anyway? You can shout and I'll repeat it.
No, we do a lot of what we call as consumer-centric innovation. I think humanity-centered, I try to use it primarily to fit in the theme of the talk as well, but we do always talk about consumer-centric innovation.
The
elements are there, I would say.
For a soap company, that was very inspirational. And in food?
Yeah, I guess design thinking was, I guess, the term we had used, but yes, I guess, our business is about people and serving them. So I think that comes back to, how we think about our customers and the humans that interact with them. So, everything we do is still mainly in a physical environment, and that's where we get to bring experiences to life and connect with them on an emotional level.
And the last comment I'll make before I shut up and let you guys talk is both companies emphasized not the technology behind it, because the food is very technological and new ways of growing food and packaging food and preparing food and even displaying it and giving people computer panels to choose among the foods. And Procter and Gamble again showed pictures of some of the early laboratories, and but the emphasis in both those stories was about the people, about the customers, about going and watching them, about observing them, about getting feedback from the customers. That makes it both human-centered and humanity-centered. Thank you.
So if we could open the question up to the rest of the panel, do you have any comments that you wanted to make to what you heard about from Jaspreet and Adrian?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you to Singapore Poly for also inviting me here. It's really exciting. I think it's a topic that's very close to my own heart and has been for a very long time. I guess I'll start with Adrian's presentation, and it's also very close to my heart because it's very similar but highly successful compared to the experiment I ran myself back in 2009, 2010, where I also started a kind of similar business based on very similar principles. And seeing this kind of business now at scale, I think is really exciting, particularly in Singapore. I think that the work they've done is absolutely amazing. And what Adrian says is it's absolutely a journey, right? The ecosystem isn't there when you start. The consumers start to ask you for things and you want to fulfill those needs, those desires, those aspirations, but you can't go quick enough, right? There's not enough organic or hydroponic material. There's not the right suppliers to produce the interior design, the components, the equipment. So it's a really big challenge, and I think to see how they've grown so well is very impressive. But it's not without its challenges. I think it can often take much longer to do things than you plan. I think you said it took a couple more months to do something than you expected. But it's really hard not to lose hope, right? Actually, you think you're this kind of individual or small unit of people doing something which can have so much impact, but actually you can't do it because there are no other ecosystem players ready to kind of help you scale. So I think for me that's a really interesting thing. I think how they've also managed to incorporate technology is really interesting, because I think there's often this balance we need to have between technology and people, and we often think it's either one or the other. And I think I was at a talk the other day and someone said, the customer service is all technology based and you will lose people. I, myself, from a kind of quite friendly, placid person, one moment to when something goes wrong with the technology, turn into quite a crazy, angry customer, right? And that really reflects badly on your business. A couple of examples like Grab. Not to but the technology doesn't work for me for whatever reason, and I often find myself in a different mode, I guess, of operating. So I think Adrian's story is really good of trying to ensure that they retain that human element into whatever they're doing with their customers. I think making the complex decisions that we want to make every day around sustainability are also really challenging for most of us. We're already overloaded. And so through their way of designing the menu, giving nutritional transparency, and kind of highlighting the benefits is really useful, because probably at lunchtime is your worst time to be making a good decision about your food, which then impacts the planet, right? So it's kind of that interconnectedness, which means that you can't really be sensible in those moments. And I think that's a really important enabler that technology can help us with. It also has the other flip side of making us quite unaware sometimes, but I think we can use that and find ways to make it better. And I think lastly, I just want to say that I really love how he tried to dematerialize a lot of his stores and all the operations. But it's not easy because there's not a great enough supply of many of these things. So it takes everybody to shift or to try and move towards this direction for it to work at scale and at the kind of speed we really need for this period of kind of the existential crisis that we're facing. And yeah, I think I like how that it's just something that's all come together really well. And from a transactional business, he's now made it kind of a relational business. So you kind of get to know your customers, your suppliers, and engage with them on a basis that means that you're actually coming together for a common goal in your own way. And I think that's something that I really liked. Should I carry on with Jaspreet or should I pass on?
We will let Mahesh chime in.
Thank you. Thank you, SP, for having me here. It's great to be back. Around 10 years ago, I was working at the Singapore Maritime Academy. I was there for a few years. And that's where I started my journey into digital and went on to found Pebble Road. So it's lovely to be back. I'm pretty sure I'm going to bump into a few friends. So thank you. Here's the Procter & Gamble story, which is lovely, 1837. And here's what I felt, right? So 1837, you got a bar of soap or the candle doesn't melt. It was a really good example of focusing on users and humans and trying to understand what they needed. They wanted a candle that does not melt in summer, and they focused on it, right? Somehow I felt that the humanity-centered part of it came on for a ride. It was designed for human-centered, but the humanity-centered came on for a ride. The reason I say that is because around 50 years later, 1837, was 1901 when the first Model A cars rolled out of Ford. And when the first cars rolled out and when people saw it, and they said that was a cleaner version. Why? Because what was the alternative back then? It was horse carriages, and you had horse shit, and the whole city smelt, and it was all dirty, and they saw these cars rolling out and said, that's a cleaner version. And 100 years from now, we are facing a crisis because of that, right? I'm pretty sure they didn't think about the harm that automobiles would create. But the beautiful story about P&G was, focusing on human-centered and humanity-centered, I think came along for a ride. But then in 2005, I think the whole thing shifted. It became humanity-centered first, I guess, with the creation of the Tide cold water. I think that was purposefully created, and all the subsequent innovations that came on for a ride. What I love about that story is that transition that happened with focusing on humans, then realizing that there was a larger harm done to society, and focusing then on being humanity-centered. I think that's the reason we are all here today, is because I think that transition has happened. And like Don mentioned, I think we should focus on humanity-centered first, and then hopefully human-centered will come on for a ride. I think that's the transition we are all hoping for. With regards to, I think, Salad Stop, a couple of times, Adrian, you mentioned how tough it was. And it is tough. You have an operating model that is not aligned to sustainability, but then you have to change practically everything to align it to sustainability. And it took a long while. It took a couple of years. And still it was a prototypical concept, and it was tested. So all the principles of design were kind of used, understanding what it was, and then building a prototype, and then testing it, and then asking users, and then meeting the suppliers, and meeting the partners, and getting the ecosystem in place. All that represents, I think, a new way of building businesses, and I think we can touch upon that later. That is the blueprint, I think, of how businesses would be built and run these days, because without that angle, it's going to be business as usual, and we need to change that. That transition needs to happen. And the blueprint for that is what P&G and Salad Stop are showing. So I think it's a remarkable moment, that transition for us to take that step forward. So thank you, brilliant examples.
Mesh, actually, if we could tap on the note that you put, you talked about a new way of doing business. And in our discussions, you talked about how you see an analogy between digital transformation and sustainable transformation.
Yes.
If you could speak to us a little bit more about that, what are the patterns that you see?
Yes, so actually, it's very similar. So sustainable transformation, digital transformation are similar because what you're doing is change. And the story of change is similar. You need to change your kind of DNA and how you respond to situations. So when digital transformation became a thing, it first started off with, I think the first iteration was known as digitization, which is taking something analog and making it digital. So before, I would have paper versions, and now I have PDF versions, and that was good enough, right? And that was digitization. But it didn't do much, right? It didn't move the needle. You could save a few dollars here and there, but didn't move the needle. The next transformation happened when digitization became digitalization. So they took on a broader scope. And what is digitalization? That's not just an analog to digital conversion, but I take on a process. I want to digitalize my HR processes. I want to digitalize my operational processes. That became more in getting into the skin. And then they realized that I have a dilemma. The dilemma is that I have to run my business, and I need to digitalize. So how do I do two things at once? And we had a name for it that was called dual transformation. And the dual transformation was difficult. It's difficult to kind of get that transition going. But with the right leadership, right investments, and right commitment, I think the commitments are important. Many companies manage to make that shift. And DBS Bank is a prototypical example of, in Singapore, from DBS, which stood for damn bloody slow, to the best digital bank in the world. That's a brilliant case study about how to really engineer a transition. I think we're going to go through a similar story with sustainable transformation. It starts off by doing simple things like buying less plastic bottles, right? That's like your equivalent to digitization. But then it's going to go on to broader things where we're going to take an entire supply chain, like what Adrian did, and say, okay, how do I reduce the carbon footprint on my entire supply chain? But you still have that problem of balancing two things at once, your business and then the change. And I hope that all these examples over here, through leadership, we can come out winners on top. So that's how I think I see the similarity between what's happening on the transformation front.
Do any of you want to respond to that?
Can? Yeah, okay. I mean, I think I would agree with what Marish is saying. And we were talking in our discussions about examples and how challenging it is for SMEs, especially to make decisions, right? You have to make a choice between I kind of do the short-term thing today and the long-term thing tomorrow. And actually the human brain, and I'm sure Don will be able to confirm this, is not good at thinking about the long term. I mean, not really good at planning and actioning on the long term. It's more about kind of what do I do now? That limbic brain we have still is there very much so, right? I think technology has outpaced our ability to do anything actually, but the longer term is much harder. So I would agree with what he's saying, but it's just change. At the end of the day, it's just another way of changing and responding to the forces, the external forces, and perhaps the internal forces that are asking you or kind of forcing you in a way to do that. But I would say I think it's probably better to do it in a slightly orderly fashion and have the chance to change whilst it's fairly predictable, as opposed to, say, we experienced with the pandemic where it was unpredictable and nobody really knew how to respond. At least this is a slightly better way to respond to some of the challenges that may affect the business in the future. Maybe Don has something to add.
Yeah, we are not very good at responding to the future. Look, when the crisis happens, people are really good at responding to the crisis and trying to help those who have been harmed. But why didn't we do some work to avoid the crisis in the first place? And the problem, I believe, is that because basically it's sort of genetic. First of all, we have very simple models of causality. Very simple-minded. We believe that one thing causes another one, and almost immediately. And if it takes a long time, and a lot of the climate issues we're facing can take 10 or 20 years before the actions actually result in something. If it takes a long time, we don't notice the causality. And second of all, there seldom is a single cause for events. There are multiple causes, but we really like to find a single cause. When an accident happens, we love to find the person that was responsible and punish the person. But you know what? It's almost never the person that's responsible. It's usually bad design. And it's usually multiple factors. So the people who study this very well, the human factors people, essentially, I'm going to meet with them on Saturday. That's tomorrow. I'm going to meet with them tomorrow. Love to go in and analyze, and they will show you that there are maybe 5 or 6 or 7 fundamental causes that led to the accident. And if any one of them had not been present, there wouldn't have been such an accident. But nobody notices that. The newspapers, when an accident happens, they find the blame, and they blame the people, or they blame this or that or the other. And when the real result comes out 2 years later, it's too late. Nobody cares anymore. It's really hard to act. And so actually, let me look at 2 of the questions that have come in. They're actually been repeated. And I'll try to answer it quickly. How can designers facilitate towards better human behavior without telling people how to live? Because this is what I said earlier, nobody likes to be told what to do. Even though if what you decided yourself would be exactly what you were being told, it's different when you yourself decide. So how do you do it? Well, I mentioned the Nobel Prize economist that I'm friends with, who, the last one, Rich Thaler, wrote his wonderful book called Nudge. And that's what this book was about. How do we cause people to do things that are good for them, but without telling them? And one of them is we nudge them. So if you're given a choice between 2 options, and one is better for you and the other isn't, we opt in versus opt out. You're given a choice, absolutely a choice. You could decide to do this or decide to do that. But if you don't decide, that we're going to choose one of them for you, but you can change it anytime you want, so we're not forcing you. But it turns out people are really bad about making decisions, because making a decision is something about your long-term growth, and you put it off and put it off. So when there's a choice between opt-in and opt-out and a default version, people almost always end up with the default. So make the default something that's good for them. Now today, many companies are fully aware of this, and they make the default what's good for the company. The default is, you watch this television show, and so you paid, some money to be able to watch it. And tell you what, to make your life easier, once you've done that, we will automatically subscribe you, and so that every month you'll pay and you'll get to watch all these wonderful shows. But if you don't want that, then tell us when we won't do it. But that's opt out. And that's the bad way for people. It's a good way for the company, because you soon forget that you've actually subscribed and you're paying and paying and paying without realizing it. So nudging is a way to do it. You want people to eat healthy food? Put the healthy food in front of them. Put the unhealthy food in the back where they can't reach it. And guess what? They'll eat more healthy food. And they don't know this is why they're doing it. So it's a subtle nudge. Now, the other question, can I see the other question again? And whoever's in control of the display. It was about, how do we manage to do sustainability and balance it against profitability and efficiency and productivity? And the answer is that's not the right question. Because they're all important. The real question is, how do you weight them? Which is most important? Which takes priority? Because actually you have to do them all. I want to improve life for people. I want to worry about the long-term impact. I want to improve the environment. But that doesn't mean that I can ignore profitability, because if I ignore profitability, my company goes out of business, and it doesn't matter how good it is, it's gone. So you have to take it into consideration. So the goal is that these are not things that you trade off. The goal is, can we manage to do the good things and the bad things, because the primary things and the secondary things, and they come together, because actually I firmly believe we can develop systems by which we're doing better for people and better for humanity and saving money. So that, in fact, aids to the profitability. It's not a choice of one versus the other. And as for productivity, the normal way of measuring productivity, I think, is actually causing more harm than good, because what we do is we measure how much work a person does, say, in an hour or maybe in a day. But if you keep forcing people to be very productive over and over and over again, it turns out people don't like that. They don't have any time to rest, any time to take a day off, any time to sort of maybe do a different job in the same company just in order to do a change and then come back. And if you optimize productivity, guess what? People leave, or people quit, or people find ways of slacking off at work that aren't measurable. But if a person changes jobs, leaves your company, goes to another company, how do you replace the person? It takes you time to replace the person. You then have to train the person. And then it takes often a long time. It can take a year, actually, before a person becomes expert at the job. And so, although it looks like you're very productive, you are losing productivity because of the harm you're doing to the people who are your employees. So by giving people a more relaxed atmosphere, where they have more control over what they're doing, they may be on the surface less productive, but in the long term, they'll be more productive. And so again, you don't necessarily have to choose among these things. What is a way of doing is formulate your procedures so that everybody wins. The world is sort of based on the assumption that everything's a zero-sum game. If I do something good for this, then it's bad for that. If you have two divisions of a company, and this division does well, the other division will do less well, we think, because the bonuses that we give, the reward structure is based as a finite amount of money, and if I give more money to this division as a bonus, the other division has to get less, and that's bad, because you end up with the divisions competing with each other instead of collaborating with each other. And so if you change the way you view things, you can actually eat your cake and also have it.
Don, if I can press you a little bit further on that, do you have some examples on how some companies have done it? Because in Singapore, 99% of all enterprises are SMEs, and a lot of them want to do good. They want to do better, but they are scared, and they've told me that they're a little bit clueless. Like, how do I even start? Do you guys, and we're starting with Don, have some examples on how do you start?
Well, first of all, an SME is although SMEs have lots of problems because they often don't have enough funds and they often can't afford to hire more people to help them get through the workload. But on the other hand, it's usually these are small enough companies so everybody knows everybody. You can be supportive, and in the very small startups, everybody has to do everything. You can't be just specialized. You have to jump into whatever has to be done at the moment, and it makes for a much more friendly, collaborative atmosphere. So the first thing is it can be more stressful, by the way, because you're always stressed about making sure your new business will come in and enough money to pay off you. Pebble Road probably has lots of stories about struggling to keep going and so on. But in the end, I suspect it was more rewarding for you because it was a small group and you all worked together to make it successful. Yeah. And so the other issue, though, is so how do you make a transformation to be, more humanity-centered when you have to change what you're doing and there's probably it's always going to cost more money.
The system has already been set up to actually not be sustainable.
But I think the way you do it is it shouldn't be the executive staff who sits there and tries to figure it out. It should be everybody working as a team to figure out ways of doing it. And I wouldn't be surprised if you couldn't invent really clever, creative ways of doing small steps that did not cost you a lot, But over time, those a large number of small steps becomes a large thing. And that's what I would recommend. Because if you do a little thing, it will end up benefiting and you'll feel better too and so on. But I really believe that's how you get to the end. There's one other thing though, and then I'll stop, is that there are some cases where you have to do something that's more expensive and there's no way out. And so you're going to have to raise your prices. And that makes you uncompetitive. And how do you deal with that? Well, if that small thing is something that's essential for the world or for the whole community, here's the example. Automobile safety. The automobile companies refuse to talk about safety. They refuse to put in seatbelts. They refuse to put in airbags. They kept saying, no, if we talk about safety, that will tell our public that our automobiles are unsafe. So we don't dare want to talk about safety because it gives the wrong impression. And they also were worried that it might cost more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the solution was, okay, we're going to force you. Government regulation. So here's a place where government regulation can actually be a good thing. Because what it does is it makes everybody on equal footing. If everybody has to do the extra cost to be sustainable, to remove waste, to do this, or if you will, to make the automobiles more safe, then you don't get any penalty for putting in seatbelts and airbags or the circular economy or whatever. And in the end, you're going to benefit anyway because it'll be cheaper. You'll have less waste, less garbage, less money wasted. And guess what? In the automobile industry and now even in sustainability, you have companies like, Adrian, I can never remember the name of your company, Food something. Good enough, okay. And P&G, who advertise, who take advantage, who say, look, what all the stuff we're doing, and it turns out to be a very positive factor bringing in new customers. There's a whole bunch of companies that are already doing the circular economy, and they make sure everybody knows. And you know, the favorite one among many of us is the sporting goods company Patagonia, which is a B Corp, and which says, you know, if you rip your clothes, send it to us and we'll repair it and send it back to you. Or eventually you wear out your stuff and it isn't usable anymore, give it back to us because we can reuse all those materials. And do they charge more money for their stuff? Yes, they do. And are they losing business as a result? No, they're not. Because people flock to them. Now, this is it's a sporting goods company and it's rather specialized, but they are doing good by doing well.
I can take this one. So that's what we are seeing in our work is, again, SMEs, and they're more S&M than, more of them are S companies, small companies. So here's the challenge. So for the longest of time, we've been focused on the profit part of it, and everything, your operating model and all your investments and all your hires and all the training and all the managers are all aligned to deliver on that one thing called profit. But now we're changing it, and I think there's a good reason why we're changing it. We're saying not so much profit, but also planet, right? And people and planet. So now there's a new focus. I got to focus on all of these three things. But I got an engine that is optimized for one. So here's where the challenge comes, is that how do I start to change this engine to deliver on three fronts? Now, some of them might say, yes, it's going to take a lot of investment and a lot of time and resources, which I don't have, and I'm not going to do it, right? That's one way of doing it. But now we got regulations, and regulation says, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you got to make that shift. And I think we saw two examples of that, and this is where I think the forward-thinking companies can make a big difference. And I think this is the part that they would take, is that they would refocus their brand. If the brand focused on product and features, that's okay, I pay you X number of dollars for that. But now if the brand says it's not just product and features, but I'm doing this for people and planet, that brings about a new kind of brand image and brand purpose. And I think Adrian spoke about that customers are actually demanding this new kind of companies, right? They want to be associated with these new kind of companies. And that's where the B Corp revolution is also starting out, where these companies now get certified, saying that I don't just focus on profit, but also on people and planet. So that's a fantastic thing, right? So that's one example from
moving from profit to purpose.
Yes, from profit to purpose, and Adrian showed how that brand is actually getting customers who pay a premium, and that's fine because you're addressing that meta health generation. Another thing that I think we can take a leaf from what P&G did was, in order to change my operating system, my engine, to refocus on now delivering on 3 fronts, you have to change everything. And that's where the checklist was a nice one, which was the sustainability checklist, which says that before we take any decision, here are things that we need to look out for. And these things are aligned with purpose, and these things are aligned with people. And so it becomes practice, it becomes habit. In fact, business processes, I link it to habit. We all have habits. So it's the habit of a company. And what we're trying to do is change that habit. And the checklist was a really good example of bringing about that change of habit.
I'm smiling at Marissa because yesterday you were telling me that checklists are so important because it's like a health check. Sustainability is like a health check. Maybe you want to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Before I do, I see there's a question on the screen, and it says, are there any kind of solutions in place that are small but game-changing for the business movement? I just want to pick up on a point that Maish made about bringing your business from profit to purpose. And actually, we have a good example in Singapore where actually sometimes your business isn't that aspirational, right? It's not as lifestyle. And finding that purpose can be quite a challenge for some businesses. And one kind of, I guess, example that we often refer to is quite an old example in Singapore of a business that was doing traditional business. And over time, and this is back in the early 2000s actually, changed from being a traditional business. The business is LHT. I don't know if anyone knows it, Lian Hot Timber. And what they did was, as a timber pallet production company, they actually started when they saw the kind of effects of deforestation, regulation coming in. They're having to pay $300,000 a year to dispose of their waste material. What they actually did was they started to change, slowly but surely, different parts of their business. So they started by sourcing different types of timber. They were a sawmill company initially, right? They started to develop new products. So instead of just having pallets, they started to, once they'd sourced technology from Germany, they then started to make packaging and I think other kind of furniture. And then they changed their business model actually from selling pallets to leasing pallets. And over time, I think this is a really good case study. They actually, became market leaders, and actually now recently they've kind of struggled to find enough timber because everyone else is doing the same, right? So everyone's then started to try and do the same model, but it's created that competition again. But it's a good example in Singapore. I think this isn't necessarily something purpose-driven, obviously purpose-driven, that can allow you to really make that gradual change. And they started this journey in, I think, 2000. So it's a good example, and I encourage anyone to look that up. And in terms of a health check, I think this mandate, I don't know if you want to put that slide up or not, if it's possible. We have a slide that shows a kind of journey from sort of business as usual to kind of compliance, which is where many businesses now are at, trying to keep up with the government regulation, to then thinking beyond that. And I think Adrian alluded to this, of kind of beyond net zero, right? It's a journey. You're not starting, you do a couple of things and then you're sustainable. Or as Don would highlight, regenerative, right? It's actually a longer term plan that needs more ongoing effort.
I think they got it up for you.
Yeah, sorry, it's the next slide. Do I need to, where am I pointing? So if you see on the part closest to Kelly, you've got business as usual, right? Which we have an extractive model, an extractive kind of business where you're just taking from the earth, you're taking from society, okay? And that is the current economic model and system that we're living in. And then if you go further along, you see this journey where we're at now, with many businesses looking at compliance and regulation and kind of just reporting on many things that they're doing, which is not a bad thing. It's a really great start. And as Don says, levels the playing field. And then when you look at, we start to make incremental improvements, You then start to look at kind of eco-efficiency, CSR, giving back to society and trying to do better, resource optimization, which is, again, not a bad thing. That's really the journey we need to start to take. And then on the far side, we have companies that are born into this and have kind of created themselves because of this imperative, and their kind of abundance, and they're kind of regenerating and giving back more than they're taking. And that's the ideal, I'm assuming, for all of us to think about, and Don's message in his book. But I don't know if that's something that's possible overnight, but the sooner you start, probably the better. And I just want to highlight one other thing, is that currently we're in the shareholder value part of our system, right? Or that's how it's been set up to kind of really optimize for, as Don said, a number of particular individuals with high profits. And then you have what we were at with the Brunton report, right? And that's actually creating shared value. But that means that you can almost separate the kind of economy, the environment, and society. But what most of us, including myself, as a kind of non-ecology-based person, realize is that we're actually completely dependent on the environment, and we don't make that connection. But really, that's what businesses and us as individuals really need to do. And maybe if anyone has anything to respond to that, I don't know if that kind of helps to frame what we're talking about when we're talking about sustainability, not just doing less bad, which is a good thing, but how can we push our businesses and our business models forward beyond that?
You know, what I really like about the slides you've shown is because when we talk about the sustainability argument and the circular economy, we sort of say, here's where we are and here's where you should be, as if it was one big step. And that's a hard step, and that it's really small companies have real trouble with it. Even large companies have real trouble with it. Again, because even in large companies, the divisions, surprisingly, are usually competing with each other. So in many ways, they're smaller companies, and they're rewarded for their profitability. If they spend extra money for good, they may be hurt. So what you've done is you've shown a timeline, that you don't do it all at once. You do small steps. And that's the increment, in general. Another principle of humanity-centered design, especially for big projects, is don't do a big project. What you should do is you should think about the big project and think about the goal you want to reach, but don't go there all at once, because that's a massive big jump, and it's going to have all sorts of problems along the way. And if the world changes along the way, and it always will, you're sort of stuck with this big goal, big project. If you do it in small steps, first of all, it's not going to be as expensive. Second of all, it's more agile. Yeah. When the world changes and things happen, well, you're ready to change because you're only making small steps. And it will cost you less money in the end, and but because you're more flexible, in the end, you're going to be probably it'll be less expensive because you haven't spent a lot of money in going the wrong direction. You're always reevaluating. And what I liked is you're the first person to make that comment in this, at least today, about doing it in small steps. And the two major speakers we had, they did it in small steps because, first of all, if you do it in the food, you were starting from scratch from the beginning. So you were able to do the small steps. You didn't have to redo anything. And the P&G, well, you took 150 years. So over time, there were many, many small steps which got you where you are now.
Good behavior over time.
I think we're going to go deep into the Q&A now. There's this really popular question that's been upvoted about 21 times. And I think you will really like this, Don. How do you prioritize between business goals and ethical decisions?
It's the same answer I gave before. Why do you think they're in conflict?
Yeah.
It's not a prioritization. Ethics is absolutely essential. And it should be part of your business goals, to do things in an ethical way. That it's, that's probably enough to say. A lot of these, which appear to be, different values pitted against each other, are not. You can combine them and make it, and if the combination is actually more powerful than the individual.
Another question here. To all panelists, when you say humanity, maybe we want to flash the question up here.
Yeah, we get to see it there.
Yeah, we can see it here, but maybe everyone else can see it. But I'll read it out. When you say humanity-centered innovation, we are talking about a diverse group of people. In this constantly changing and challenging times, how do we prioritize the demographics? We can't please everyone. Where do we draw the lines?
Let me quickly do that one. I'm a friend of Arturo Escobar, who has written a great book, lots of books and articles, but it's about the pluriverse. That is, yes.
You said Pablo Escobar.
It's Arturo. Arturo.
Oh, sorry. This could have gone in a totally different direction, but okay, sorry.
No, he's come from Colombia, but he actually teaches at the University of North Carolina in the United States. And the whole point is the world is composed of a diverse group of people. And the goal is not to prioritize, not to say this group of people is better than that group of people and they come first. The goal is to actually have a pluriversal world where the different kinds of people in different cultures can coexist, but they have to do it by It's actually complex to do, but basically, we're not going to have one solution for everybody. We're going to have multiple solutions for the different types of people. There's a philosopher who once pointed out, though, that if you want to live in a tolerant world, which is what the pluriverse requires, because we have to be tolerant of people who are living differently and have different ideas, in order to live in a tolerant world, we have to be intolerant of groups that are intolerant.
Yep.
Because there are some groups who say, we are doing the right thing and everything you are doing is evil and wrong and we want to get rid of you. No, we cannot tolerate that because we won't have a tolerant world if we tolerate the intolerant.
Our panelists, do you want to respond to this? Diverse group of people.
From a business point of view, again, you can't please everyone. There was this story, again, I think it was, I forget the company, it was Nordstrom, I think. They were so popular and about their customer service strategy that they said that, we are so giving that, if you want to return anything, we would just return it without asking. So somebody wanted to test it out. So they bought this big tire and they don't sell tires, right? So they got this big tire to the customer service saying, I want to return it. And because the policy said that you got to return anything that people might, they come for, they returned it, right? And that story went viral and said, look at the company, right? It returned the tire. But then a lot of the scholars, especially the customer service authors, and they looked at it and said, that's really a bad thing to do because that person is not your customer and he's doing this to kind of mock you and you just did it and you set a wrong precedent. So who are your customers, right? Who are really your customers? And I think that draws the line for small businesses as to, can you please everybody? No. So who are your customers? In fact, we can turn it the other way around and ask that, if you have a set of customers, those customers, what do they want us to be? And you ask those questions, then that changes. So when it comes to, I think, delivering business value or sustainable value, I think that choosing customers or choosing the right customers, like in what Salad Stop does, not everybody would go there, but the right people for that
customers
company
who
would go
opt
there.
in.
Yeah, you need to opt in. And I think what's happening is that there's a general conscience, right, of sustainability today. And there are more people who are opting in for that kind of a company, and they would opt in. So you just using that and doing what your customers really wanted you to do in the first place.
Let me point out, by the way, don't just ask who are your customers, because you know what? There are a lot more non-customers, a lot more people who are not your customers than who are your customers. And you want those people to be your customers too, right? So don't just look at your current customers to see what you should do. Look to see why are those other people our customers.
Marissa.
I think just to add, I mean, I made a kind of switch from kind of more design-related activities to kind of more sustainability-related into my work. And I think there's this comparison or kind of similarity between kind of all your I know you don't like the word users, but all the stakeholders, right? In sustainability, it's your stakeholders, and you do materiality assessment where you bring together people who wouldn't normally be part of your decision-making, part of your kind of design process, to come and talk to you and to understand what their challenges are. So you're just including, and I think John also alluded to this, more people or more groups within that to try and make those decisions, right? Who can sacrifice or who can live without something, who can, be better equipped with these tools. So I think bringing in more perspectives and including a more diverse base of people and other living beings, I think is a really important part of that. So that can help you to prioritize as well, I think.
I need to comment because you said, I don't like the word users. Yeah, I don't call you a user. I don't call anybody a user. I call you a person. In fact, when I switched from user-centered design to human-centered design, I think that was wrong. I should have switched to people-centered design because I don't call you a human either. I call you a person. And the same way, I don't like to study consumers. You mean people who consume? That's the old model that's the old economic model. Is if I sell food, that's pretty good because the people eat it until they have to buy more. That's a pretty good model. You don't have to worry. But if I sell cars, the car industry deliberately made their cars that you had to replace them pretty quickly, so that every year they made small changes, but every 4 or 5 years they make a big change, so everybody could tell that you were driving it out of an old car, and so you had to buy new ones, and because they wanted people to consume the cars, consume the goods, consume this. Today in the cell phone company, the mobile phone company, you're supposed to replace your phone every 2 or 3 years, and we keep changing the operating systems and the applications and the new type of wireless system. We have 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, 76G, etc. And no, that's really harmful for everything. And it appears to be beneficial for your profit, but not for long, because people are getting pretty fed up about this.
I'd like to just so that model, which is the consume model, again, if you're putting on a sustainability lens, I think it changes. Two stories, quite similar. They changed from selling products to selling services. And I think Philips is trying it out now. They call this Lux as a service, which is light as a service. So they give you the bulbs for free, and they charge you for the electricity. And if you think about it, that changes everything, right? Now when I'm making the bulbs, I'll make them longer lasting because I got to pay for that thing, right? And so
same with, by the way, engines on airplanes. Same thing. Same with tires on trucks. Same thing. We don't sell the tires. We sell you miles. We don't sell you the engines. We sell you hours.
Yeah. So it's
a service. That's the major change, by the way, is switch to a service economy.
And that's one of the, I think, something that we'll have to grapple with as we move forward is from a product-centric to a service-centric and how we do that. Okay.
So I think we may have time for one more question. It's flashed up here. Mr. Norman, can you elaborate on the role of education institutions as a note to bring in multidisciplinary approaches? I mean, you can read it, right? So I shan't read it to you.
The traditional educational programs are... I'm trying to think of a kind way of putting it. One of the most conservative organizations or conservative people in the world are professors. And any of you deal with professors, it's miserable. And I blame the reward system of universities. In fact, in many behaviors in companies and in governments and in universities is all based on the reward system. People do what they're rewarded for, and then we complain about it. And the better universities all want to hire the best people in the world. Well, how can everybody hire the very best? Well, if you have narrow little specialties, then guess what? You can have a lot of good people. I claim I'm the very best person in my field. I'm the only person in my field. And as a result, though, we have the universities divided into into schools or divisions, and those are divided into departments. And in the departments, you have many, many different specialties, so much so that in the computer science department or the psychology department or literature or any department, you have people who are so specialized that other people in the very same department have no understanding of what the others are doing. And in companies, we follow those same kind of disciplinary boundaries. Instead of saying that, the engineers and the scientists and the marketing people, the salespeople, the designers, all have to work together to do a better job, but they're all in different disciplines and they're in the different divisions. And we have the marketing group and we have the design group and we have the engineering group, and they tend not to like each other because they're competing with each other. And if one division does well, as I said earlier, it's a zero-sum game. So and so the universities don't know how to work with each other. And even when we say we have project teams and we are multidisciplinary, what they mean is we have different kinds of computer scientists all working together, or different kinds of designers all working together. But you don't have the best courses I have seen is where you, in fact, in the United States, there's a wonderful course that's taught in design jointly with the Rhode Island School of Design, which is called RISD, or MIT. And they're actually about 2 or 3 hours apart, and that's usually hard. But I went to one of their programs. I listened to the presentations, final presentations, and they were among the best I've ever heard by students, because they require that every single team have a business student from MIT. Every single team had to have an engineering student from MIT, and every single team had to have a design student from RISD. And the combinations were therefore creative, and they were built in a way that was reliable and functional, and you could build it at a reasonable cost. And then the marketing people were also making sure there was a real market for it. In fact, marketing and the usability or the user experience people often fight with each other. Who owns a customer? And it's absolute nonsense.
I think I would.
You have different approaches because the user experience people know what people really need and to make sure it fits their needs, et cetera, and the marketing people know what people actually buy. And those are not always the same things. But let me tell you, I was at Apple when we were making these great products and nobody was buying them. It doesn't matter how good your product is. If people aren't buying it, you go out of business. So you sometimes have to, Sony once made this radio that had extra bass. It sounded much better. And so everybody thought, well, wonderful, the designers thought. But no, the marketing people said, I'm going to put an extra button there. When you push it, you get better sound. And why would you put a button in to make better sound? Why don't you just make it have better sound? Because the people won't know. So they put that button in with the assumption that everybody would only use it once. You'd push it and there was better sound. And so you leave it that way. But that's important. If you don't buy it, it doesn't do anybody any good. Yeah. So I think we have to change marketing. I'm sorry, we're wrong. We have to change the educational system. And by the way, this new emphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, I hate. Why? It's not because those are bad topics. Those are essential topics. But basically, that's simply repeating the same specialized science people, specialized mathematics, specialized engineering, specialized technology. No. We should cut across those boundaries. Get rid of them. On top of that, where's the people in there? Nothing about people. We need to study people. But don't go to the psychologist to learn how people work. Psychologists are specialists. I have a PhD in psychology, and what was it all about? I know how the ear works. I know how we hear things. So it's crazy. If you want to know about people, you know where you go? Go to a novelist. a novelist has to really watch and observe and understand people, because when they write a story about people, you have to be able to read it and say, I know people like that. So we have to bring everybody together, and it doesn't start with the educational system, because it has to be all over the place. And actually, I just had this wonderful conversation with, what's your new company from India in Pune? Quick, Symbiosis, yes. Where that's exactly what they are trying to do, is put together all of these disciplines in the new liberal arts education that's happening certainly in India and a few other places, I hope. In fact, many other places, I hope, because that is the future of education.
I wanted to jump in a little bit earlier because SP's MAD school, Media Arts and Design School, does a transdisciplinary program. So it sounds very similar to your idea of bringing together different disciplines.
Yes. And I don't know the program, so I'm not criticizing it.
No,
but I've seen many people, that many universities do this. But in fact, they're not really. Because what you do is you bring in this specialty who has the first 3 weeks, and then another different specialty who has the next 3 weeks, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're not really working together in a collaborative way.
So we are actually out of time, everybody. I'm a little bit sad that we have to stop this conversation, but I think the wonderful thing is that SP's DTUX website has actually put our LinkedIn details there. So if anything that we said resonated, if anything you want to challenge us, please reach out to us on LinkedIn. All our details are there. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank our lovely panelists for sitting here with us and sharing all this with us. So thank you very much. And
And I would like to thank our lovely moderator for keeping us.
Thank you.
Lovely moderator.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I just want to make a plug for Singapore Design Week. So if you guys haven't heard the news, Singapore Design Week is on right now, and there are a lot of activations going on all over Singapore. Tonight, there is a late night walking trail that's happening in the Bras Basah Bugis area. So please come by and have some fun.
Can I plug?
Can
I plug? Can I plug?
Okay.
And Maish, maybe.
Yeah.
We also have a couple of events going on. We've got a couple of free tickets. One's a panel discussion talking about ethics and design and AI, if anyone's interested, and a workshop redesigning the future of the design industry. So if you'd like to come and find me.
All right.
Yeah, and 28th, that's next Friday, we're having a discussion with Bloomberg and AI Singapore and Amazon on how to use AI technologies in business. So that's a free event if you want to subscribe. That's Friday, 28th.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly, for moderating, and thank you, panelists.